when he played drums, I'm pretty convinced that he shut out the disease.
It's interesting. Drumming saved Jim Gordon's life, but only for a while. I'm John Bowden. This is Rock History Music. Drums and Demons is the brand new book from Joel Selvin, who's written many books on rock and roll. And he's put together this story which has been intriguing for so many people for so many years. Recently, we just lost Jim Gordon. He died in prison. We'll tell you about his life story in just a second. But for Jim Gordon, there was a thin line between drumming and madness. In this 5-part series, we're going to tell you an awful lot about the behind the scenes, the people who were in Jim Gordon's life. His daughter, his ex-wife, Mike Post, the guy who does all those soundtracks, was one of his best friends. Here's part 1, the book Drums and Demons. There'll be links in the description where you can pick it up from Joel Selvin on Rock History Music. Jim Gordon was a professional drummer, born July 14th, 1945. He was famous for being a very popular session musician and was known as a protege to drumming legend Hal Blaine. He played on some classic albums, like the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. He was in studio with Paul Revere and the Raiders, as well as the Byrds and Judy Collins, and Frank Zappa. In 1970, he was part of Joe Cocker's Mad Dogs and Englishman tour. He also toured with Traffic and was on 2 of their albums, including Low Spark of High Heel Boys. He was featured on Harry Nilsson's famous Nilsson Schmilsson. There was also Johnny Rivers, Art Garfunkel. Let's not forget he was on Steely Dan's album Pretzel Logic featuring Ricky Don't Lose That Number, and a few tracks on Alice Cooper's 1976 album Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Gordon was one of the most prolific session drummers of the 1960s and 70s. He was known for his incredible versatility, and as mentioned, famous for playing on some of the biggest songs of those decades. He was born in Los Angeles and began drumming professionally as a teenager. He became a key figure in the Wrecking Crew group, the not-so-famous musicians who played on very famous hits. Let's revisit some of those hits. Layla with Derek and the Dominos. He was part of that band on their one and only studio album. Though he's given a co-write to Layla, there's a lot of conflicting stories that the piano coda in that song was actually written by Rita Coolidge. Then there's You're So Vain by Carly Simon. His drumming's really featured prominently on that 1972 hit that topped the charts in both the US and the UK. One of the most impressive guitar hits of all time has to be Classical Gas by Mason Williams. It's an instrumental, came out in '68, and was one of Gordon's early claims to fame. On that track, nothing but finesse drumming. As mentioned, Ricky Don't Lose That Number by Steely Dan. There was Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell, that famous Jimmy Webb song from '68. Again, very subtle drumming, yet essential for that ballad. It's known as one of the greatest country songs of all time. And the Albert Hammond hit from '72, It Never Rains in Southern California. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention one of the greatest post-Beatle albums of all time by any member of that band, All Things Must Pass, with George Harrison, 1970. There was a dark side to Jim Gordon's life. In the 70s, possibly as early as the 60s, he started hearing voices, most notably his mother's voice. And eventually his condition worsened. Tragically, in 1983, he took his mother's life. He was convicted and sentenced to 16 years to life, though he stayed there for the rest of his life. He passed away in prison on March 13th, 2023. Though there are conflicting stories, it seems his schizophrenia was undiagnosed at the time of the crime. Jim Gordon, one of the greatest drummers of all time, and unfortunately overshadowed by that awful crime involving his mother. Well, you had mentioned in the book the very nature, the thing that made him mad also made him brilliant. That's my words, not yours. I'm not sure how you put it. I've got it on my notes here someplace, but that's interesting. But it's also, that statement itself is brilliant. Of course it is. Everyone knows someone with schizophrenia, everybody. And if you put it that way to them, they'll go.
Yeah, and the other part of it is that when he played drums, I'm pretty convinced that he shut out the disease. That you're a drummer, you know what it feels like to drum. It's encompassing between the rhythmic entrainment, the hypnotic power of the mighty groove, and
the spirit. Every men's group has a drum. Every men's group drum. This is spiritual.
The report of the drums, right? It fills your whole body. So I think that when Jim played drums, he was well. He was whole. He was in command of his life. He was in charge. He was on top of the world. And then when he stopped playing drums, it all just flooded back.
You mentioned Skip Spence in the book, Moby Grape, and I just talked to Peter Lewis a little while ago, and he tell these most amazing stories. But with Skip, everyone's interested in this Peter Green, Fleetwood Mac, Skip Spence. I can't write enough about Sid Barrett because it just there's always a crowd for it. But there's this. What do you think it is? The longing for the curiosity of madness in music.
Madness and art. I mean, Van Gogh,
Yep.
he was probably schizophrenic too. The combination of those things has always been a volatile deal of people who have mental illness. That their brain chemistry is entirely different than what so-called normal people are, and then you factor in the enterprise of creativity. So they have a different sphere that they're operating in. And there's no doubt that those things are related, and it's tortured a lot of people. I mean, the whole life of Charlie Parker is a perfect example. He was a musical genius who saw around corners, and as a human being, he suffered tremendously from mental illness and an inability to relate to other people.
When I was younger, I remember someone introduced me to Bill Evans, the piano player, the other guy. And I remember I liked it because I used to have a recording 8-track. I could record on an 8-track machine, those old pieces of crap. But I found the Bill Evans Live in Japan was the longest 8-track you could buy. So I'd go, I'm going to record over this. And one day I thought, I think I'm just going to listen to this. I mean, I keep buying I like buy 5 versions of this deleted 8-track. And I finally listened to him. And of course, people started telling me about him and his problems and the dual diagnosis that these people have, right? They're dealing with this, but they self-medicate with this. And it's a fascinating thing. I mean, it's all over jazz.
I knew Evans' record producer, Orrin Keepnews, real well. And
Really?
Orrin was a wonderful guy. And there's nothing more fun than taking Orrin to lunch and saying, Thelonious Monk. And then a half hour later saying, John Coltrane. I mean, but and what the thing that fascinated Warren was the secret Bill Evans tapes. Do you know about those?
No, no.
So some guy made a hobby of recording Bill Evans without Bill Evans knowing it. He had a suitcase with a microphone built into it, and he would go to New York nightclubs and he would record Bill Evans without anybody knowing it. Well, see, Bill Evans was super self-conscious. And if he knew he was being recorded, his playing style changed completely. And so Orrin found these tapes. The guy brought them to Orrin, and he flipped because this was the raw, naked Bill Evans that he could never record, that he could never get on tape. He put out a CD box set called The Secret Bill Evans Tapes. So, I mean, to me, I'm my ear isn't tuned in enough. I mean, I listen to them and they're great, but I mean, I don't see the distinction that Orrin did between, like, say, Jazz on a Sunday Afternoon and this stuff. On the other hand, it just goes to show what how goofy this guy was. That the red light made him change his whole approach to playing.
I got to start by telling you something. I've never read your work before, but sir, holy snapping turtles, you're a great writer.
Well, thank you. Can't hear that too often.
I like that. Well, I'm surprised. I like, what I really liked about the book? I love the way you had me from Pate, you like talking about, the latter part of his life first with the Blue Monkeys. That you got me. You're like, I mean, obviously, I'm a drummer. I'm a 41-year broadcaster. I've talked to many people who knew the guy through the years. It comes up all the time. David Paich went on about a big thing about him too, and it's one of those captivating things. How long has this been? Let's start here. How long has this been in the works for you?
I spent 4 years on it.
Yeah. So how far back in your life were you consciously aware of him, Jim Gordon?
Oh, Delaney and Bonnie. I don't think I knew about him as a session musician, but Delaney and Bonnie had a huge impact on people who were paying attention in 1969. They were just an incredible band. I saw them at the Santa Monica Civic, and yeah, and then goes right into Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which was a tour that everybody noticed at that time. So Jim Gordon was a figure of repute from that point on. Derek and the Dominos just sort of sealed that deal, right?
When I was talking to Dave Mason, talked about Delaney and Bonnie, of course, and playing with, of course, the daughter and in the reinvited Fleetwood Mac. But he had told me something before we go on. He says the world. I'm so surprised that the world, the people who should know about Delaney and Bonnie don't. He says that bothers me.
Well, they didn't have a hit record, and they had an incompetent manager, Alan Pariser, who was, you know, a hipster pot dealer, and you know, they were in the engine room of Leon Russell scheming and thinking about how to get out of the studios, and Delaney Bramlett, who was pretty much in the grips of drugs and alcohol abuse. So they didn't have like that focused leadership. I don't think the records were quite up to speed. I mean, the singles. There's a couple of singles on Atco that come close, but they, you know, they had problems with Elektra. They had an album in the can at Stax. They moved to Atco. I mean, you know, they really weren't a commercially viable. But the band, oh my God, what an incredible band! The Rhino Handmade outfit put out a 4-5 CD box set of all the European tour recordings, and that's the thing they made the on tour album out of. But this is just the raw stock, recorded by Andy Johns, and my gosh, are those strong shows, and the band just kills everything. So, you know, yeah, I'm with Dave. You know, I don't know what happened there. But those of us who were paying attention at the time certainly knew about it.
You know, Bill Bruford told me, and I've got a quote here. He says, Brits are determinately arrhythmic, he said. I said, what? He says, well, you know, some of the best drummers, he loves all American drummers. And but I found that interesting coming from Bill Bruford.
Well, the English guys had such a different approach to things. They didn't have the great tradition of big band jazz and rhythm and blues drumming. You know, they come from much more polite sort of music hall background and light jazz. Guys like Humphrey Littleton, who was a big figure in the so-called trad jazz movement. I mean, it is, you know, holding your sticks like chopsticks and all that. So yeah, I mean, American drumming was a different world to them, and it was the Hollywood guys. I don't want to not mention Gary Chester out in New York, but it was the Hollywood guys, Earl Palmer, Hal Blaine, and Jim Gordon, who really took the drums out of the hands of the Gene Krupa files and made rock and roll drumming a scientific matter.
We'll have part 2 of our series coming up with Joel Sullivan in the next few days. Make sure you comment on our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos. If you want to make a donation to the channel, there's a PayPal link. Also, join our Patreon. You'll get early access to our videos. And we have a swag store where you can buy a Rock History Music t-shirt, cap, and all kinds of different swag with our logo on it. Subscribe to our channel, share our videos, and comment on them. I'm John Bowden. This is Rock History Music. Take care of yourself.